And greetings. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast alongside Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. I'm Steve Deace. We are brought to you by our friends over at Patriot Mobile. If you want to make the switch today to America's only American mobile phone provider left, do what our family did. Make the switch. They'll make it as seamless as possible. They'll customize it to your family's needs. They'll give you a free month of service, too, to get you started if you use my name, Steve, as your offer code at patriotmobile.com/Steve. That's patriotmobile.com/Steve. Use the offer code Steve, and then you'll no longer be giving your money directly to corporations that hate you, and you'll actually get a customer service team you can understand. Sounds too good to be true? What if I also told you within their network, you need to switch networks? They've got 3 major networks within their meta network. You need to switch at any time for whatever reason. They'll let you do it for free. So now what do you have to lose? Make the switch today. PatriotMobile.com/Steve. Use the offer code Steve for the free month of service to get you started at PatriotMobile.com/Steve. Also want to let you know, election night coverage coming up here on The Blaze in 5 days. And we're bringing everybody in, including yours truly, to cover this watershed event. You want to make sure you don't miss it. We're offering our biggest discount ever. All right. $40 off an annual subscription to Blaze TV right now when you go to blazeelection.com/Deace. blazeelection.com/Deace. You'll get $40 off at blazeelection.com/Deace. All right, coming up on today's show, we're going to talk to a government professor at Hillsdale College about just how safe and secure are the elections here in the United States. Also, next hour, it is the last Thursday of the month. It's also Reformation Day. Some of you know it is Halloween. So perfect opportunity for us to do a feedback Theology Thursday with some of your feedback that we will be discussing coming up in the second hour of the show. Before we get to all of that, though, a point of privilege to start, if you guys don't mind.
Well, you are the scourge of Media Matters in the New York Times, so you got all the privilege you want.
No, that's exactly where I'm going to go.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
I didn't mean to.
So that's all right. You stepped on my line, but actually made it better, so I appreciate it.
Okay.
So, you look for, when you start off as this plucky little local sports talk radio host on a bankrupting, station that doesn't exist anymore, and that's where you began. You walked right out of a mailroom and did that job, and you started as the part-time news assistant on the agate page of the Des Moines Register sports section, right? And you start working your way up little by little. You look for certain benchmarks, right? Certain benchmarks that like Steve Martin in The Jerk. When Steve Martin saw his name in the phone book in The Jerk,
yes,
and he runs down the street screaming, "I am somebody, I am somebody." He's arrived. His name is in the phone book. I mean, he started off, you look at that's an inspirational tale. He starts off as a poor black child. And he ends up a wealthy white guy in the phone book. And that happens, who also hooks up with Bernadette Peters. And that all happens within the span of about 90 minutes. It's a life well lived. I think we would all agree.
Amen.
So you look for benchmarks, right? And like when the big 50,000 watt blowtorch radio station in your state calls and summons you for a job, you view that kind of as a benchmark, right?
Yeah.
When you get your first national syndication gig with a major radio network, even if it does mean you're going to be on the air till midnight, right? You view that as a benchmark, right?
Another one.
Glenn Beck calls you up one day when you don't know him at all and says, "I read your book and it blew my mind and I want to put you on my show." And then 24 hours later, movie producers who heard that interview call you and offer you a movie deal on that same book. That's a benchmark, right?
Keep checking boxes. Yeah.
One of the real benchmarks is in the summer of 2015. The New York Times sent one of its feature writers, Jackie Calms, out here to Iowa for several days to be around me, to profile me, to get to know me. Had dinner with our family. She interviewed my mom about our own personal story. And, because we were gearing up, for another Iowa caucus cycle. And now we've got a record number of Republicans running. And, now that there's been 2 of these cycles now that I stopped Mitt Romney from winning, word is on the street, which frankly is maybe my personal favorite benchmark. But word is out on the street, okay, who is this, dad bod, chubster in Iowa? All right. with his thumb on the scale. Who is this guy, right? So they sent her out here to profile me, and hey, it was from, a more liberal publications premise, but they did a fantastic job. It was truly a great honor. I still have the cover story that they did for me, about me, for the New York Times Sunday magazine. It's framed in my man cave at home. I family members I'd not heard from years saw it, contacted me. I mean, it was one of those moments where it kind of, even family members that don't agree with me politically were like, okay, I mean, from kid to the 15-year-old mom to the cover of the New York Times Sunday magazine, and that's my nephew, that's my cousin, you know what I'm saying? It's the kind of thing, that everybody in the family was like, that's a big bleeping deal, right? And so that, I thought maybe up until this moment now, the New York Times was responsible for maybe the greatest recognition I've received in my career. But I have to tell you, I have come not to bury the New York Times, but to praise it. And I had no idea. I mean, Christmas came early. I had no idea this was coming. No clue. I'm just trying to work off another, an egg witch on the Peloton this morning, and my phone starts blowing up because apparently the New York Times, by God's grace, has decided to give me an even greater honor than they did a decade ago. And I would be remiss if I did not demonstrate humility and gratitude and say thank you. The New York Times this morning is out with a report, and it labels myself, Rudy Giuliani, Tim Pool, Michael Knowles, Ben Shapiro, and Tucker Carlson. We are all in the same graphic together today in the New York Times as leading the way in election misinformation. And I have to tell you, I mean, I want to share some excerpts from Media Matters, which we normally mock, but the New York Times let it be known they used Media Matters to research this story.
I'll remind you after the show to send flowers to Phyllis.
Is it Phyllis or Myrtle? Who's the
Ethel.
person over there? Ethel, who didn't get laid off and everyone else did. Okay. So here's a couple of things in the footnotes to the story that Media Matters provided. In fact, let me just share one, because I don't want to make it all about me here on the Steve Deace Show. Deace also alleged that the Democrats' game plan is to get the polls, quote, within the narrative margin to justify cheating. And I cannot correct. They quoted me correctly, even in context. And I cannot thank them for helping me to elevate this platform and my message. And I had no idea. I saw Tucker Carlson tweet about them coming at him, and Ben Shapiro tweet about them coming at him ahead of time. And frankly, I'm not in those guys' stratosphere from a platform standpoint. Although,
are you?
This is gonna help. Not gonna lie, this is gonna help. Okay, so thank you for that. But I have to just say, I won't have as many family members burning my phone up about this New York Times appearance as I did the other. But I'm going to have a lot more friends. And I just got to say, thank you. You like me. You really like me. And the New York Times, now this is the second time you've given me the big one over the last 9 years. And I just, let it not be said that I am a selfish lover. And I just thought I needed to take some time here, gentlemen, before we got into the stuff people actually want to talk about. To talk about me, I'm sorry, to talk about this great honor that the New York Times has bestowed upon me here, right at a moment where I'm like 6 months away from a contract negotiation window, and we're coming up on election season when there's more eyeballs and earwax on shows like ours than at any other point in time. So, I mean, this... If I could not have timed this better if I tried, and I didn't. And that's what makes it so special. I literally had no idea this was coming. I did nothing other than tell the truth to earn it. And yet again, in my career, I see the scripture verse that says the wealth of the wicked will be stored up for the righteous, fulfilled in my hearing. So I have to say thank you very much to the New York Times. And I got to tell you, based on what this is going to do for me, my kids, they thank you. My grandkids are going to thank you. My wife is sure as heck going to thank you. Probably going to get thank you from Todd and Aaron here in about 6 to 9 months.
For the win, baby!
Going to get quite the thank you from them.
Yeah!
I got business partners. They're going to be thanking you. I got lots of people going to be very, very thankful for this recognition. So it's not just about me, but about everybody else who's aligned with and agrees with me too. And I just needed to thank all of those people, including the little ones. You gentlemen have any thoughts?
Is this called earned media? I don't understand those terms. Is this what that's called? Or unearned?
I'm going to call it that.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Like this media is going to help me earn some more. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for that. Yes.
Well, next time you have some grifting complaints about this show, send them to the New York Times and Media Matters.
That's true. I mean, I use the New York Times for my grift. What do you use? Yes. I use the New York Times. So how you like them apples? And with that, all right, let's get to it. Enough about me. Not really. I'm just kidding. Here's Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by the master of retail politics. Less than 24 hours after Joe Biden's comments that he thinks half of Americans are garbage, the Trump campaign procured a Trump-branded garbage truck and drove it to his rally in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
How do you like my garbage truck? This truck is in honor of Kamala and Joe Biden.
Inside that rally, Trump wore that high-visibility jacket instead of his typical suit jacket.
I have to begin by saying 250 million Americans are not garbage.
Morning, Joe. Your thoughts?
The gaslighting never ends. They really do think that their voters are that stupid.
Democrat VP hopeful Tim Walz says calling half the country Nazis is just something that a president does.
How is she going to find common ground with people who supported Donald Trump, someone she calls a wannabe dictator and a petty tyrant?
Well, good morning, George. Yeah, the vice president's rhetoric is the rhetoric that a president of the United States gives.
Speaking of Walz, I regret to inform you he's doing that weird leg kick thing again and making Kamala uncomfortable. ABC's Jimmy Kimmel did that thing that Trump supporter Douglas Mackey went to prison over.
If you can't vote early, vote on time. If you want to vote for Trump, vote late, vote very late. Do your voting on Thursday or maybe Friday.
Moving on, Oklahoma Superintendent of Public Instruction Ryan Walters has submitted a bill to Kamala Harris detailing the high cost on Oklahoma public schools of Kamala's wide-open southern border. In August, Walters tasked his department to work with school districts to calculate the financial impact borne by taxpayers on illegal immigrant minors. That analysis resulted in an estimate of $474.9 million, which he demanded of Harris in that letter. The Director General of the World Health Organization, Mr. Tedros, says COVID really messed up their vaccination racket.
More than 14 million children in 2022 did not receive a single dose of vaccine. Working together with partners like Gavi and UNICEF, we aim to halve that number by 2030. But the serious challenge that's posed by anti-vaxxers, and I think we need to strategize to really push back, because vaccines work, vaccines affect adults, and we have science, evidence on our side. I think it's time to be more aggressive in pushing back on anti-vaxxers. I think they use COVID as an opportunity and, all the havoc they're creating.
And finally, Joe Biden was on camera at the White House last night biting babies. Yeah. And that's what happened while we were away.
All right, let's get to what's in Aaron's montage. And let's begin with the garbage thing just really quick. Okay. I think we're going to win. And I'm going to be extremely happy. And I know, though, just because of how mercurial he is, how mercurial some of the people he'll appoint will be, there are going to be days, probably start in late January, where I'm going to come in here, all right, and pop a blood vessel. I'm like, what are we doing? Why are we saying that? Why is this happening? Fair?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, that may even happen weekly, if we're being honest, right? It's going to be at least a semi-frequent occurrence, more than likely, right? Like, I'm going to ask, why do we do that? What's the point of that? Why do we say that? That doesn't make any sense. Stop it. It's going to happen.
Yes.
Right? It's going to happen. Now, if the other guys win, I probably won't have to say that as often, because that New York Times profile will just become a search warrant.
Yes.
Right. Okay. That's who we're looking for. These guys. Start here.
Yes.
Make an example out of these guys. All right. That's a most wanted photo, right? And so we're Thelma and Louise, Todd, Aaron, and Steve are on the lam if the other people win, right? Okay. So I would prefer to have to complain semi-frequently from this nice, cozy studio than to ask, please, sir, may I have some more? From a train. All right? I don't think that's an unreasonable preference. Anybody want to say, I just think that's just a really selfish decision. Okay? So I'm bringing this up to say this. When those moments come, and they will, we are dealing still with Donald Trump after all, and as even people I know and love and respect that are very close to Trump will tell me privately, he can be complicated. I want you guys to remind me, don't blow a blood vessel, because this is now up there with the Cambodian smoking toddler. Remember when I'd get worked up at night, Aaron, and used to pull out the video of the terrorist in mid-propagandist rant getting blown up by a bomb? All right? The things that bring me peace and joy in life, the trash man thing is in that pantheon. All right? From a branding, messaging standpoint, that is freaking legendary. It is freaking legendary. It's the kind of stuff on campaigns people that do what I do come up with that you could never get a candidate to do, and so you don't even bother to even ask, right? Well, it would look dumb, it'd look silly, it would look contrived, look like a pander, couldn't pull it off. In many cases, that's true. And that's probably true in many of the cases for the kinds of candidates that people like me like. That's probably true, okay, frankly. All right? But for whatever reason, okay, the most famous man in the world, billionaire that drops butt biscuits from a gold toilet on his own private 727 can pull this thing off. I have no idea how he does it. Okay, we all have a gift. That is one of his, clearly. But that image is freaking legendary. To pull up in the trash truck, the garbage truck, and do the press conference from there, so you have to force the media to cover it. Force the media to elevate. You want to talk about it? You asked me what earned media was, Aaron, in all seriousness? Yeah. It's that. All right? You pull up in the trash, in the garbage truck, to do a press conference with the media that hates you. So you force them to cover your troll. I just, when those days come, okay, and they're going to, and you feel like I'm going to go overboard from criticism to a mind melt. Aaron, I just need you to pop up that small collection of visuals that just soothes the savage beast, the Cambodian smoking toddler, the terrorist, the jihadist who gets blown up in real time in live rant, and Donald Trump wearing the orange vest in the garbage truck. It is quite possibly the single greatest example of owning somebody politically from a branding and media standpoint I can ever recall. I mean, it's just, you wanted to put it on Mount frickin' Rushmore last night, Erzin.
Oh, and that's resonating with the American public on Twitter. At least. Yes. It's freaking legendary. And the willingness to come up with it and then pull it off and execute it
before the embers had even gone out of Joe Biden's comment. This was less than 24 hours. Hey, we found a Trump branded garbage truck just lying around in Green Bay.
Well, and he has a lot to do if he wins, and this is why it's going to be so important that people are his policy. He gets the right people to help him do this. And if he gets that done and can take the load off some of his shoulders, Steve, as president, not just as candidate, he should go out of his way to do things like this at least once a month as part of connecting with the American public in terms of what his economic message is going to be and buy-in. He should be working at McDonald's and driving dump trucks and whatever the equivalent is, the theme of that month, he should absolutely be doing this. There's no loss to it.
I don't disagree. And I think now, the thing is, now that you've what you're saying is now that you've tapped into this, you can go back to this well. Don't do it too often, but you can do it many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and so I wanted to just make sure we mentioned that before we got into anything else. On the Jimmy Kimmel thing, if you want to vote for Trump, vote Thursday, Friday. First of all, I don't know what country Jimmy Kimmel thinks he's living in, but you are going to be able more than likely to go vote for Donald Trump next Thursday and Friday if you want to, if we're being honest. All right? And you can especially vote next Thursday and Friday for Kamala Harris if you want to. Maybe we're not sure you can still vote for Donald Trump next Thursday and Friday, but I think we all damn well know you're going to be able to vote for Kamala Harris next Thursday and Friday. I think we all know that. Can I get an amen?
Oh, what's the bizarro, ugly, dark, upside-down world of amen?
I mean, that's what I want to see some laud. Okay, I mean we all know you will be able to vote for Kamala Harris next Thursday and Friday if you want, and still quite possibly, at least in some places, you'll still be able to vote for Donald Trump. They may not count it, but they'll let you mail it in. All right. That notwithstanding, didn't a MAGA meme maker go to prison?
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Yes.
Yeah. And what was that guy's name again?
Douglas Mackey.
Yeah, but he went by the name. It was Ricky Vaughn, is what he went by on online. So I didn't even know his actual name. So obviously you're going to get doxxed if they're going to prosecute you. So Douglas Mackey was his actual name.
Yep.
Okay, but there's your two-tiered justice system for you, right there.
Yeah, guys, consequences must happen soon, quickly.
I have no idea how much Trump 2.0, if we're lucky enough to get that, will be able to constructively and meaningfully push back from a policy perspective and a governing perspective on what's been done to us. And that more than anything, because now we rope in what happened with Fauci. All that gets roped into that. That more than anything is why I was emphatically for Ron DeSantis in this primary over Trump. Because I've seen him actually take the reins of power and take back ground. All right? At the very least, I'll say this about Trump and the Trump era. Even if we're sitting here even if he wins and we're sitting here 4 years from now and we're disappointed. At the very least, though, this era of Trump as a would-be standard bearer and face of the American right has accomplished, I think, a very important thing. And when you have Tedros in your montage, Aaron, I stopped counting at 4 times he dropped the term anti-vaxxer. All right, much of the power that the spirit of the age has acquired in this last decade or two all comes from the fear, or primarily comes from the fear of their labeling. I don't want to be a racist. So by all means, let's not have law and order. I don't want to be a homophobe. So by all means, let's have drag queen storytime hour. I don't want to be a xenophobe, bigot. So let's have open borders and turn the southern border of the United States into the frontier trading post for the opioid and human trafficking global industries. I don't want to kill grandma. So let's take 10,000 small businesses, and small businesses employ about 70% of the American workforce, and let's just have them permanently erased and they never come back. I don't want to be an anti-vaxxer, so let me go ahead and just take multiple rounds of a toxic, untested, experimental genetic serum. The public pressure that goes along with this And then they're leveraging of media outlets to accomplish it and to force it on people. That's why we use the term. What I just described for you, by the way, is a psyop. It's why we use that term on this show so often, and it's being used throughout the contemporary right so often. That's what we're talking about. Aaron used the term yesterday, emotional blackmail. You can call it that. You can call this spiritual blackmail, spiritual warfare. Okay, all those terms apply, and they're all synonyms of a psyop. At the very least now, when we see guys like Nick Bosa in the middle of a live stand-up for Sunday Night Football come out with a MAGA hat, when you see the black running back for the Green Bay Packers last night sitting in the front row, okay? The stigma, what the left does very well is attach stigmas, and it's a very Marxist tactic, to attach stigmas rather than arguments to their opposition. Stigmas. You're a fascist, you're Hitler, you're a MAGA insurgent. And then immediately that stigma, they leverage that with their media and social media platforms so that there's now a social cost, perceived anyway, to being labeled one of these things. And then that gets a lot of people to conform or be silent if you won't conform, which is another form of conforming. I don't think we've completely done away with it, and frankly, the last year of Trump's presidency with what happened with COVID indicates we have not. But there has been clear ground taken now in pushing back on these instant stigmatizations. And understand, this is going to still be their tactic moving forward. They cannot win on evidence. They cannot win on logic. What they advocate goes against wisdom and logic because it's against the created order of the universe. That's another, those are all nice ways of saying it's insane. And so to get you to do things opposite of sanity and logic, you have to be psyoped, emotionally blackmailed, spiritually warfared against.
Endless gaslighting.
Yeah, you have to be, because you won't do it if you're sane. But the pressure of conforming, this is what happens in Marxist countries. No one speaks up because of the penalty of doing so. And so therefore, when someone speaks up, no one joins them because they see the penalty the one person who didn't conform suffers and pays. At the very least, no matter how a second Trump presidency potentially unfolds, if we're lucky enough to avoid a Kamala presidency and get that, when this is over, we do need to thank him for that. Again, there is still much work to be done here, but there is no question that progress has been made on pushing back against these stigmas. Because this is a primary tactic of Marxism. And by the way, another term for stigmas. Now listen, Cozy, really close up to your speaker right now with what I'm about to say next. Okay? A synonym for stigma or stigmatize is accuse. Who's the accuser? Whose name means accuser. So another way of saying what I'm saying here is that these aren't just stigmatizations or stigmas. They're satanic. And that is what we have to buy into in order to get us to do things that even in our sinful state, we still retain enough of the Imago Dei. We know they are wrong. So how do we get manipulated into doing things that even our basic God-given conscience, even when it's racked by sin, knows is wrong? How do they get us to do it? They stigmatize you. They accuse you. Well, you don't want to be aligned with those people. You don't want to be called one of those. And if we can get to a place where enough of us build a critical mass of saying, I give zero bleeps about that, you will see a house of cards fall, because that's pretty much the cornerstone plumb line of all their power, the perception of it. More in a moment. Well, there are a lot of voter guides going out this time of year in an election year, but our friends at Hillsdale College, they want to put out the ultimate voter guide, the U.S. Constitution. Their goal is to take 1 million pocket U.S. Constitutions and get them in the hands of that many voters between now and Election Day. And if you want to help them do it, or you want to be one of those voters that wants one of those free pocket constitutions, here's all you need to do. Go to daceforhillsdale.com. Use the preposition, not the number. FOR, daceforhillsdale.com. Complete a simple form there. They'll put it in the mail for you as soon as possible, and the shipping is free as well. One of the best ways to defend our nation's founding principles is to learn about them. And one of the best ways to do that is to read our founding documents, including our Constitution. So get your pocket Constitution today, or as I like to call it, the best 2024 voter guide you'll find anywhere else. When you go to daceforhillsdale.com, again, this offer expires soon. Go there, daceforhillsdale.com. Now, it's completely coincidental that our next guest happens to be a government professor at Hillsdale. But we saw this hook yesterday and thought this is definitely something that we want to address. And so we want to welcome to the show Dr. Matt Mehan, the government professor there at Hillsdale College. Matt, it is a pleasure to have you on. It's just another coincidence today. I'm wearing my Mackinac Island hoodie from my former home state of Michigan as well. So thank you for joining us today, brother. Good to see you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Steve.
I want to talk. You wrote a piece recently on for First Things about the ethics of the voting process. All right, and I want to talk about one particular ethic to lead this off, Matt, and that is they're going to steal it anyway. So what is the point, right? The steal's already in. So what is the point? They just had a ruling in Nevada. They can count ballots for 3 days after the election. So what's the point? The Secretary of State in your home state there of Michigan, who's a real communist piece of work, admitted that the Dominion voting machines are having issues all over the country. So what's the point, right? In audiences like mine, there is a not insignificant percentage of people, and I think they have evidence to believe this based on what they've seen in the last election, but have taken it to a nihilistic conclusion of what's the point? They're just going to do whatever they want anyway. What would you say to those people in particular if they've been that level of black-pilled?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of white pills you might give. I mean, I think a simple one is, how would you ever know that the vote was stolen if you didn't have a lot of personal conviction that everyone had already done what they ought to do? So that's just kind of a quick swipe of practicality on the question. But I think more importantly, you have a duty to vote. It is a duty of the citizen. It's not understood that way, the way a lot of people talk about it today, and that's a problem. But it's true, and that's why I wrote the piece. Was a lot of the black pill discussion and a lot of what I call hashtag I can't even type of discussion about wading into the scrum, and in a certain sense the dirtiness of smash mouth politics, that people just couldn't do it. And I think some duties are dirty, like changing your kid's diaper, and if you don't like it, it doesn't mean because you're disgusted by it that you don't still have to do it. And I think too many times people use their feelings as opposed to thinking it through as to what they ought to do, and then asking their feelings to try to get on board with what is the right thing to do.
Since you're writing for First Things, let's apply a ecclesiastical or theological context to this discussion, because I think we do need to set some kind of boundary. Because the history of the Christian faith does show that cultures descend to the point that we literally just have to abstain. And no, we're not going to worship Caesar as Lord, for example. We're not going to do that, okay? No, we're not going to convert to Islam no matter how many swords you put to our throats, okay? And so we do need to understand, particularly if we're in a post-Christian America, which I believe we are, and if we're in a negative world now theologically, where there is immediate suspicion of our faith as opposed to accommodation or affirmation of it, as in past generations, which I also think we are, that there could very well come a time where this is just too sordid for us. That there's just, you're asking me to compromise pardon the pun, Matt, first things in order to vote for you. I do think that we should acknowledge that it is very possible, given you and I's ages, particularly, and even people younger than us, the country could continue to descend into a moral chaos where that might be the case in the future.
So I totally agree that is possible. A couple responses. One, for instance, lighting the candle to Zeus or bowing before Caesar as a god, in one sense, clearly those are not duties that any Christian could say they have. But duties that are in accord with our nature and our human dignity, that are laid out by law, those given to Caesar, what is Caesar's, that's Christ's admonition. We got to pay our taxes. We need to do the things that are our civic duties. Those, I think, don't go away until you actually see the dissolution of the political order, i.e. zombie apocalypse level chaos, which we're by no means near. EMPs and various apocalyptic scenarios set aside, but there's clearly voting, there's clearly an office, there's clearly an expectation, a law that says you're supposed to, even if some people are frustrating that and sowing seeds of corruption. As to the post-Christian era, here's a little white pill, Steve, and you can, accept or reject it as you wish. But I like to say, well, if we are in a post-Christian era, then let's just be like every Christian in one of those situations and say we're in a pre-Christian era, right? So, and if we are,
sure,
then we can look to other times when Christians were in a pre-Christian era, and they were very participatory in the duties of their civic life, when they were in accord with right reason, with nature, and with natural and divine law. So I think voting clearly is one of those things. But yes, I totally agree that at a certain point you could, have to disengage. But I think people are not setting the right standards for how you would judge what that break point is, and it's more they're measuring it according, like I said before, of their disgust. They're just grossed out, but that's not enough.
Well, that's the second time you've paraphrased H.L. Mencken's observation that behind every great cynic, there's a romantic who's just been disappointed one too many times, right? So you're right. I mean, if we're a post-Christian era, then ultimately we also therefore believe we're in a pre-Christian era because not even the gates of hell prevail. So I completely agree with that and appreciate that correction. My point was, though, that things are not going to necessarily, in this kind of an era, maybe appear as cut and dried as they used to be. Let me give you one example, all right? So I've worked on campaigns before. I got offered a job to work on Trump's first campaign. Let's say I take that job, and I've been with Trump this entire time. And he now is openly for gay marriage. And he says to me, I need you to go talk to people like First Things. I need you to go write a column, Steve, as one of my comms people for First Things, why your voters need to overlook the fact I'm for gay marriage and vote for me anyway. What I'm going to say to Mr. Trump is, I can't do that because my Lord says you're wrong on that. If you want me to write a column for First Things on some things my Lord says you're right about, and that therefore believers should look at those things and as a reason to vote for you, that I will do. But if you want to ask me to write to them that they should overlook something that their Lord has made very, very clear in both his Old and New Testaments, what his word says on that, and that they should therefore accommodate you because you're just that special, I can't do that. That's kind of what, those kinds of distinctions are, I think, what is in store, frankly, for people like us in the future, barring a revival.
Yeah, so I think that's right. I think there's going to have to be a lot of discernment about what is telling the truth, what is sort of what you might call decorous speech, meaning, look, if you don't want to insult somebody, you don't want to have every fight at every moment, right? There's a certain amount of, I think, both Christian charity and basic prudence that recommends you don't get in everyone's face about every issue at every moment. Right? Like Christ says, be wise as serpents, innocent as the dove. Right? It doesn't mean we say everything everywhere all the time. That said, I think there are ways to make a discernment about a political better, understanding that it's also the political less bad or lesser of two evils, but that if something is the lesser of two evils, it's not a lie to say, therefore it's better. And so you can say positive things right, in public about a choice with an understanding that it's positive in a certain sense, right? And that's okay. And I think that's not somehow necessarily scandalous. If somebody doesn't understand your beliefs and you keep them completely buttoned down, and no one knows your opinions about the faith or about, various, proper traditional teachings, et cetera, well, then that's a different problem. But the idea that you can't say something positive or do something positive like vote for what you take to be the lesser of two evils or the better candidate in that understanding, well, that's not going to work. That's not good enough.
I tend to detest the phrase the lesser of two evils. I have my whole career because everything's the lesser of two evils. We're all evil. So could my wife find somebody whose sins she could tolerate more than mine, who's better looking and smarter? Sure. And any woman I would ever marry would be able to do that too, because we're all sinners, we're all fallen, we all bring a point of diminishing returns to the table. To me, I like arguing from the premise of what would do the most good. And I don't understand it, and I say this as someone who helped lead the charge against COVID stand and the jab and the mistakes that Trump made his final year in office that the Biden regime has just tripled down on. But I don't understand, and anybody could sit there and say that the country was not in a better place collectively and in every form from 2017 to 2019 than it is right now. So that's a very easy choice for me to make. There's just the country, everything was better off from 2017 to 2019 when the guy running again was running the show compared to the people running the show now. I don't know why it has to be any more complicated than that.
So, yeah, two things. One, I agree with you. That's kind of what I'm saying is I use the term lesser of two evils to talk to people who are, I think, too black-pilled and not comfortable with the common sense approach that you just gave of like, no, I'm talking about securing goods. I'm choosing a good when I'm picking a imperfect but less imperfect person. So why can't I talk positively? I think the reason why some people don't want you to do that, and they think that they're wiser than the common sense approach you just gave, is because they have a lot of refined sensibilities that they haven't properly settled down and overmastered that sense of disgust at moral imperfection. And so I think that idea of, you asked, why don't they just see that this time was better than that time? It's like, I actually think the answer is why they don't see is because they don't have the strength or moral fortitude to calculate, because they see something they find offensive in a candidate and they go, I just can't do it. This is just too disgusting. I can't do it. I'm done. I'm out. I just can't do it. I'm over. And that is, I think, a kind of lack of virtue that people who think they're very virtuous and who are in many respects, it's a lack of fortitude, prudence, and justice that they think is virtue, but is actually its facsimile. And it's hiding a kind of honorable hypocrisy because they won't do the work to think that calculation through, which I think is, in one sense, one that everybody can do. But if you don't have the strength to bother with it, it seems impossible and you just don't bother to discern and deliberate. But you have a duty to deliberate, and you can't just get out of your duty to vote. Like the idea of like, well, they don't make us vote. It's like, well, of course they don't make you vote because they don't want to force someone to do something against their conscience. We're not going to waterboard citizens in the soul to get them to do something they're too confused to do. But the point is, you shouldn't be so confused. You should get serious and do this deliberation. Why? Because you have a duty to do it. I can't change that diaper. It's too gross. I'm sorry. You really must. It's your duty to change your child's diaper, right? It's your duty to vote. And so once you have that understanding that it is in fact your duty, your moral duty, to try to make this deliberation and not just vote protest, but put someone in office, which is the purpose of a vote, right? Then suddenly I think people have more strength, more inducement to do the calculations you just mentioned.
Matt, appreciate the discussion, brother, and all the work you guys do there at Hillsdale. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
You bet.
Good to see you.
You bet. Good to see you too, Dr. Matt Mehan there from Hillsdale College. If we had more time with him, we're up on a break, I would have mentioned it. Let's also remember though, ultimately the responsibility here lies, and I'm confident Matt would agree with what I'm about to say next. The person running for the job has the responsibility to get hired, not the person doing the hiring. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's also totally okay to be less disgusting, to say less stupid things, and to be less offensive, and to be more principled on stuff people care about. That's okay. You're free to do that. You know what I'm saying? You can be more disciplined. You're free to do that. You don't have to, you don't have to feed people's suspicions and fears unnecessarily. And I frankly think with the campaign they've run the last 2.5 months, it's the best face forward that I think the public has seen of Donald Trump in the 9 years he's been a political figure.
Agreed. And it's what you just said is why I wasn't banging the Trump drum before July when he got shot at, for the very principle you talked about. Show me, impress me. I'm all ears. But man, that last part there, that was incredible. That was the stained glass window version of your narcissism isn't principles. Prudential judgment, the classical virtues, demand that you get side of your id, which is the ick factor. Oh, and he's not quite like me. And you be a grown-up and you weigh and measure all the variables on the table. We need more professors like him everywhere other than Hillsdale, because what he just gave you is not something. It's something that the minds of Western civilization have been trying to pass on for generations. And right now we're failing.
The conversation about the lesser of two evils back in 2016, in the context of can we have a better candidate than one with no record who says grab him by the hoo-ha, who was a Democrat up until a few minutes ago? Can we do better than that? In the context of can we elevate our standard a little bit more than this? It was understandable, but then he actually governed and did a pretty good job from 2017 through 2019. And that was also before we had the Russia collusion hoax, the Kavanaugh is a marauding rapist hoax, the any number of multiple impeachments.
And the hoax that was Paul Ryan in the House Republican Party.
Yes. And then, of course, 2020, before the social compact was broken. So the conversation about elevating lesser of two evils in terms of elevating the standard of what we expect from our candidates, that maybe, and of course, hindsight being 2020, what became of much of Never Trump is absolutely grotesque and hideous. Ask David French, ask any number of those people there. But at least in the context, giving the maximum benefit of the doubt, some of those lesser of two evils conversations were understandable 8-9 years ago. They aren't now. On no account, because of the record and because of what the social compact has done to us. And it's been broken. So tracking with a lot of what he was saying there. And he just, as Todd said, put a finer touch on the don't substitute narcissism for principles.
Theology Thursday's next. We're back here with Hour 2, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast with Aaron McIntyre and Todd Erzin. I'm Steve Deace. Let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. You can do that via email, steve@stevedeace.com, DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show on X or Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Please keep subscribing to our new YouTube channel after the New York Times is trying to get YouTube to censor us again. We really need you to keep subscribing. All right. At Deace Show. It's not all cherries and rainbows getting that award from the New York Times. It'll be a trade-off, and one of them will be Aaron. Might have to start a third YouTube channel here in about 10, 15 minutes.
Why not?
All right, why not? All right. Well, I don't know what the heck we'll call that one. Right. But for now, subscribe to our new YouTube channel at Deace Show. Again, that is at Deace Show on YouTube. And thank you if you have done that. Also, thank you if you've left us a 5-star review on your podcast it's not a word. Your podcast platform you prefer. Thank you for that. We appreciate all of those. Please keep those coming, and then also make sure to hit subscribe or follow. And if that's on iTunes, as you hit the follow button, and that'll make sure that every time we drop one of these new episodes, it drops right there in your feed every single time. So thank you for that as well. And we want to thank our friends at Home Title Lock for coming back with us here to partner on the show. And I got to tell you right now, with such a sluggish housing market and yet home values skyrocketing, a lot of us are sitting on a lot of equity. And that could absolutely make us a target for scammers who file a one-page document using your information. Maybe they got off the dark web or some other place that's been hacked. They forge your signature. They stamp it with a phony notary seal. They submit it to the county, and just like that, they can claim that the property is theirs and not yours. And a lot of times, they don't even want the house. They want all that equity that you're sitting on right now. And you can not even find out until after they've taken out loans against that equity and those bills start showing up in the mail. That's why you want the triple lock protection system from Home Title Lock. They'll monitor your title 24/7, alert you if there are any changes to your title, and they'll work fast to restore your title with no out-of-pocket costs if fraud indeed occurs. So don't wait until you're a victim. You can get a free 30-day trial and a free title history report when you use the promo code SteveDace at HomeTitleLock.com. All right, get that special with the promo code SteveDace, my full name, at HomeTitleLock.com. Well, it is Halloween, but before we called it Halloween in the West, we called it Reformation Day, or All Hallows Eve as well, which is even much older than the Reformation. And that is the first question that we're going to be asked about. I guess we're going to call this now Feedback Theology Thursday. We told you guys as we did this study with Romans that when we got to the final Thursday of every month, that we'd go to your feedback. Stuff you guys have sent us that's either specifically about what we've covered in Romans so far, and I think we're almost through chapter 5. Do you guys think we're ahead of schedule, on schedule, behind what you thought when we started this at the end of March?
I think we're arriving precisely when we mean to.
I like that answer. Yeah,
that seems about right. I think it was important that we went to a full hour.
Yeah.
Let it breathe.
Yeah, when you suggested that was a smart move. Yes.
That was me that suggested that.
Oh, was you?
Yeah.
All right. When you suggested that.
Thank you.
That was a smart move.
Thank you.
Hey, today of all days, I want to make sure everybody gets the credit that they deserve. Right.
It's amazing what I can accomplish when I get all the... No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. So today, was that earned media for you? Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go, yes. So today is Feedback Thursday, since it is the final Thursday, October 31st of the month of October. And let's just kick this thing off with a bang. All right? Because we are studying the book that started this entire thing. Not to mention, it's funny, you could argue that after the apostolic era, the two most pivotal figures in the history of Christianity were Augustine and then Martin Luther. And both of them, Luther, of course, was a monk out of the Augustinian order, but both of them their theology was primarily inspired by the very book we are studying right now. In the case of Augustine, it was a copy of the book of Romans that he found at a friend's house that he started to read and convicted his soul and his heart that he had to repent and become a believer. And for Luther, it was when he studied the book of Romans for the first time on a trip to Rome for some of his duties as a monk. And even went so far as to say chapter 1, verse 17, and the righteous or the just shall live by faith, Luther said was the verse that inspired the entirety of the Reformation. So you could argue that they are the two most pivotal figures in the history of Christianity post-apostolic era. And both of them were inspired primarily by the very book that we have been studying this year and will probably study for most of next year as well. So with that in mind, let's kick off the questions. And for these, because of we're dealing with cosmic forces here, not just our own opinions, I am trying to make sure you guys see these ahead of time so you guys can have your thoughts kind of collected, Joe writes, you guys have referenced the Reformation quite a bit. So forgive me a stupid question. It's not a stupid question at all. But what exactly was that? And does it explain the arguments between Catholics and evangelicals? So,
yeah.
Moving on. Yes, Joe. Yes. But it's not a dumb question at all. In many respects, I don't know how many Protestants know much of anything at all about the Protestant Reformation, which is the great irony, because I'm not a reject tradition guy. I just don't think anything belongs. I think Scripture gets its own line of ecclesiastical authority. I think Scripture gets its own. It sits at if this table were the table of knowledge, wisdom, ethics, and authority on earth, Scripture sits at the head of the table. But I would have tradition like pretty close to the head of the table, just not sitting in the same seat or sharing a space. But I do think we need some clarification here. I mean, after all, what are the epistles? They represent the writings of the humans in the very first era and generation of the church, trying to take the cosmic revelation given to them and displayed in front of them by the Lord, and now make sense of it in the world in which they actually live.
But not just writings, authoritative writings.
Correct.
And then that's not just history looking at within the writers themselves saying these are authoritative.
Correct. So then the question then becomes, does that authority ecclesiastically get passed down? And if it does, then ultimately, what's the judge of whether who is using that authority with prudence or not? What would judge all of those things? Okay. But what's ironic is much of 20th and 21st century Protestantism has done such a number on tradition now that most Protestants don't even know anything about the Reformation in and of itself. So they don't even know why they're going to a Baptist church. They don't even know why they're going to a Lutheran church in many cases. They don't know what an Azusa Street revival is, so they don't know why they're going to a Pentecostal church. They don't know. They don't actually know the origins of the traditions that they adhere to. So let's do a Reader's Digest version of this. Before we do that, Aaron, are those series of Theology Thursday podcasts we did in 2017 for the 500th anniversary, are those still in the RSS feed, the same one?
You know, I can double check on that, but they're somewhere.
Okay.
Definitely somewhere.
Because if those are still in the same podcast feed and, you don't mind scrolling a lot, I mean, you can go back to 2017 and Todd and I did a series of Theology Thursdays. I think we did, or was it still Worldview Wednesday back then? Something.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't remember which day of the week it was, but we did a series for whether it was Theology Thursday yet or Worldview Wednesday still, where we did a series, now very rudimentary layman series here, where this isn't, Luther and Erasmus here. Okay, let's not pump too much sunshine up each other's keisters. Okay, but as best as we could do with the limitations we clearly bring to the table every day, we tried to have as constructive of a conversation as we could about the two views that were warring over each other during the Reformation. So let's just start with a very blanket historicity of the event. All right, there is a monk who's of the Augustinian order, meaning from the order of Augustine, right? Saint Augustine, Augustine of Hippo, who was without question, Protestants and Catholics all agree on this. Without question, for the most post-Paul, the most influential voice. Theological voice within Christianity for at least the first millennia of the church. And you could argue that influence still remains as preeminent as it is today. A lot of the ideas the Reformers believed in had their origin in Augustinian theology. Reform means to rebuild, to go back, to what you did. That's why they called it a reformation, not a replacementation or a revolution. To go back to what you did before. All right? And so a guy named Martin Luther studies the Bible. He's already a monk, studies the Bible in depth for the very first time, has a series of crises of conscience with theological and ecclesiastical contrasts and criticisms of the church that he serves, the Roman Catholic Church. He teaches at a seminary in Wittenberg, Germany. And on All Hallows Eve, he shows up it's a door, but it's basically like a bulletin board like you see at universities nowadays, where you can, hey, I need a babysitter, hey, I need a ride, or hey, I need a tutor, or I am a tutor, or, we have a party, right? Okay, so he shows up at this door, got like a bulletin board at his seminary there in Wittenberg. And one day, this day, in 1517, he nails a piece of paper to the door that will become known as the 95 Theses. And in many respects, it's a collection of criticisms, grievances, questions of contemporary Catholic teaching. The preamble of Luther's 95 Theses basically is summarized with the phrase, all of the Christian life is a life of repentance. And then he proceeds to list these criticisms. The document that he nails to the door, he calls it a disputation, which is an academic term for a debate. He thinks he wants a debate on these things. He's going to get way more than he bargained for. All right? He's going to get the debate, just more of the debate that he wanted. He's going to go on trial for his own life, okay? And ultimately, the sticking point of his theological, we're skipping over a lot of history here, guys. I mean, entire volumes and great volumes of work have been written on this, okay? There is a fantastic movie both Todd and I would recommend that Joseph Fiennes starred as Luther. That movie's about 20 years old now, isn't it? Early 2000s, I think it is.
It feels like it's, yeah.
But it's an outstanding and fairly accurate historic portrayal from a Luther perspective of this event. And so if you get a chance to go and watch that movie, Luther with Joseph Fiennes, we would both highly recommend it. Okay? We wouldn't say it's the definitive thing, but it's a fairly accurate portrayal, snapshot of one side's argument during this event. All right? You have to understand now, we are in the midst of Western civilization. Christianity, via the Catholic Church, created Western civilization. It saved Christendom from Islam in the early Middle Ages and launched the Crusades. All right, and so Christianity is imbued in every facet, really, of Western life at this point in time. And we have just begun now sending heralds into what's called the New World. Right, so we're less than 20 years, or we're 25 years after Columbus has sailed here to the New World. All right, so we've got Magellan is a contemporary of this era, and Vespucci, and so there's already a thought of this is a new era. We've discovered the world is not flat; it's round. So it's time maybe to reassess some things. There's a paradigm shift afoot, and so that's already the zeitgeist. That's the backdrop of this event. Then when Luther takes all of that sentiment and zeitgeist now and gives theological authority to it, which takes this now to a whole different level with this date and his 95 Theses. Trials take place. He's put on trial for his life. Ultimately, there are many theological arguments, but ultimately the argument that the crucible here is the Pope infallible or not? And Luther says that he is not. Because if the Pope is infallible, then therefore that's all the justification for the contrast and criticisms required from Luther's point of view. And so that then ends him having to go into exile. He commits his final acts of excommunication by translating the Bible into his native German. This because it was considered, against the law to translate it in any other language other than Latin, because of going back to St. Jerome's Latin Vulgate, which is still a fairly reliable translation, even based on what we know about the Bible and original manuscripts today. All right. So again, guys, I'm giving you. Stop me if I've been unfair to anybody so far. Have I been unfair to anybody so far? We okay?
I don't think you've been unfair. I mean, it's not going to surprise you that
you have a different...
my telling would, or any Catholic's telling, but no, I don't think you've been unfair.
I want to make sure I'm getting the historicity of the events okay, and then we can argue about the specifics if we want. Right. All right, and ultimately what this leads to is what's called the Reformation. And out of this, a whole series of new leaders in the church emerge whose influences are still felt today, like John Knox, Zwingli, maybe the most influential of that other second-tier group outside of the original conflict, John Calvin. Okay, if you want to know where all your denominations come from, Mennonites, Amish, Baptists, all stem from this event. All their various origins go back to this particular event. And it radically transforms Western thought to the point that it changes the way scientific exploration is conducted. It leads to the founding of this country. I mean, after all, the Pilgrims are Puritans. They're heavily influenced by the likes of Calvin and the other reformers, and they come here because they're trying to escape, because now they think the Church of England is trying to do to them what the Church in Rome did and exercise unworthy, undue ecclesiastical authority over the Word of God. So they challenge that. They then have to flee. They come here. They bring their Calvinistic, Pilgrim, puritanical theology here. And you can see it right there in their initial document, the Mayflower Compact. They are here for, quote, the advancement of the kingdom of Christ. It says that right, or something like that, right out of the Christian religion, right out of the Mayflower Compact. That's straight hermeneutic. That's reformational hermeneutics right there. I mean, it radically transforms all of Western civilization. We can argue for the better, for not. What were they right about? What were they wrong about? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that is it in a nutshell, and in a very limited 10-minute nutshell. Is there anything else before we discuss any of the particulars of the debate from a historicity standpoint that needs to be thrown in there, do you guys think?
So I was just doing some browsing, looking for the our archives, and yeah, they're there, not sorted very well because of the transition. But I think it's important to note as well.
Right, because this was pre-Blaze.
Yeah,
yes.
So they're not sorted super well. If you sort oldest to newest, you might be able to find a few. I mean, this is, I can't, so I couldn't hear if you noted this as well. This didn't just happen in a vacuum, just randomly in 1517. I mean, a century before that, John Wycliffe were burned at the stake, called heretics for some of their calls to reform in the Catholic Church. So there's that as that.
And then the Protestant king of England took his academic, youthful mentor, Sir Thomas More, and burned him at the stake.
Yes.
Yeah. There was a lot of burning at stakes going around. All right, so lots of steak, not the kind you eat. No, I mean, there was a lot of steak burning going around. There was a lot of revolutions that went on, and the outcome of the Reformation, for what it means for all of us as Americans, regardless of your religious identity or theological predisposition, there would be no America as you've known it. There might have still been an America, but the people that founded the country were directly influenced by the Protestant Reformation. And so that's why things that even Catholic historians have noted the phrase, the Protestant work ethic. I've heard you use that in the past. That stuff was all very imbued at the beginning of America. So the idea of if I now can have an individual relationship with God without having to go through an earthly intermediary, then why do I have to go through a king to access my God-given rights? That's a direct corollary to some of the thought that came out of the Reformation. The other thing, though, was this is also why the founding generations of this country put a huge premium on religious freedom. They didn't actually mean it necessarily in the context that we do today, or only mean it in the context that we do today, which is, can I actually still be a Jew or Christian who believes the Bible and not be persecuted for it? They actually took it a step further. This is what it means in the Constitution when it says no religious test for office. All of the 13 colonies, to some varying degree, were either inspired or directly, but one, were either inspired or directly founded by an organ of the Christian church, a denomination. And the only one that wasn't, Rhode Island, was founded to be a place that would be a haven for Christians of all stripe to come. And it's because of that, and each of these denominations' beliefs that they had the superior view of Christianity, that the founders had they were afraid of sectarian violence and insurgency within Christianity. And so that's what it didn't just mean you as a Christian will not be persecuted for wanting to follow a biblical worldview. It'll also mean you won't persecute other Christians, okay, who have a different interpretation of some of these matters than you do. And so the phrase separation of church and state, the first time that shows up in the American lexicon, there is a group of Baptists from a place called Danbury, Connecticut. That colony was heavily governed by the Congregational Protestant Church. And in almost all of these colonies, you had to belong to that native, whatever church had chartered the colony, you had to belong to it to hold public office. And so these Baptists one day write a letter to President Thomas Jefferson, our third president, because they're concerned that the Congregationalists are going to impose on their convictions as Baptists. And they thought, who better to appeal to than the president who wrote the words, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, right? So they write to President Jefferson asking him to intervene and have a federal solution to this. And President Jefferson writes back to them that a, quote, thin wall, end quote, of separation of church and state is implied within the Constitution. But he says but here's the thing though. He says it is not to protect the state from the church, but protect the church from the state. And he says to them, you do not want to set the precedent that the federal government can come in here and settle your ecclesiastical matters. You will regret that later on if you set that precedent. Now, that's not at all like the separation of church and state battle that we have today, right? In fact, it's completely it's bizarro world, upside down version of it. But that also was, very prevalent out of the Reformation. One of the leaders of the separation of church and state was a guy named John Knox taught this. Okay, and sphere authority, that there were certain spheres that had authority, individual authorities given by God, and were not to mix. Because at this time in the Catholic Church, and correct me if I get any of this wrong, Todd, but at this time in the Catholic Church, there would at times be direct back and forth dealings between the state and the church, even for ecclesiastical offices like bishop. Okay, am I right?
Yes.
Okay, and so. No matter which side of this you come down on from a soteriology standpoint, or meaning that the science of or the study of how are we converted, how are we saved, or on a justification standpoint, the historical impact of the Reformation is not in dispute. What is in dispute is its own theological claims to that historical impact, and that debate rages until today. But the way that it altered the landscape of Western civilization, you're still living and feeling those impacts as an American here in the year 2024.
Yeah, that's a show right there. Yeah, it's hard to limit. There's so many threads to pull on. Just from the historicity standpoint, I would offer some additional context, and that's already been alluded to by Aaron, that this didn't pop out of the ether. It had been going on for a while, but that's the nature of the entire church up into the Reformation. Reform, discussion, debate, that didn't always go smooth. So that isn't new here. What's new that made this uniquely possible? Several things. Printing press.
Yes.
Big deal.
Yep.
Nation state.
Let's explain why. Because this was the first time mass communication outside of any established order was now a democratized process.
Yes.
And so now, even while he's on the run, Luther can get a message out to the masses that previous attempts at this would not be able to do.
So this was an early version of something going viral.
Yes.
And we know that can be good. That can also be bad. Nation states. Again, this was no longer Christendom in terms of Holy Roman Empire, etc. And this was important from the get-go because it protected people like Luther in a way that they wouldn't be protected in the past because of loyalty ultimately to the emperor or to the empire. And then also, obviously, it's why this thing splintered so quickly. There was Luther himself did not intend to this be a Reformation the way it happened. In fact, Luther was very, very resentful that there were other Luthers out there. And he tried to quiet them down because he said his reform was the correct way. He did not like what Zwingli was doing. Calvin was not his immediate contemporary, so that's different. But he had huge problems with the other reformers and how they were doing things, but they all had places to hide now, and you had various Protestant versions in different nation states. The other thing, the irony of this comes immediately after the Renaissance. The Renaissance
another good point. Yep.
Was a throwback to the things of old, and so in one way, the Reformation was trying to do that, go back to the time of the apostles, as you said. But ironically, the Reformation was always a direct rejection of scholasticism, which was St. Aquinas and others' very high philosophical musings about the things of God that the Reformation thought was anti-biblical. Going back, and they were harkened back to a Catholic of old, Tertullian. What do the things of Athens have to do with the things of Rome? So there's contradiction within this thing. They did want to go back in one sense, but they also wanted to make things less philosophical, which is what the Renaissance was going back to do. And the time between the apostles and Augustine is deeply philosophical. So there's some contradiction there. And then lastly, just as applies to the person of Luther, I think it's called inscrutability, the term, but this is a Catholic notion of not being able to accept, and I don't even know if it's a specifically Catholic, but as it applies to the sacrament of confession, it is. But I think Protestants may have this thinking along these lines, not being able to accept forgiveness. And he kept going back and back to confession. The priests were telling him to stop because he was obsessed with this. So it's not just philosophical.
And that's depicted in the movie.
He's not just
yes.
He's clearly a smart man, a passionate man, one worthy of respect.
He's a very pugnacious one as well.
But he's also highly neurotic individual.
Which probably all those things were going to be required of someone to stand up to the hornet's nest that he ultimately did, whether you agree with them or not.
And lastly, the Catholic Church, no matter what the case was, and Erasmus, his immediate contemporary, was arguing for it, but within the church, the Catholic Church was absolutely at a time at that place where it was in need of reform.
We haven't even brought in. Who was the family that Machiavelli based the prince on, that were basically trying to take over the papacy at this the
Borgias.
The Borgias, yeah, thank you. So guys, this is a historically fascinating period of time. I mean, the amount of dramas, movies, TV series that could be done about this and not have to embellish anything at all, okay, and just almost like well-acted docudramas would be. I mean, it would be the edge of your seat kind of TV. It would be this is Game of Thrones level stuff, but all within Christianity. All right, we're up against the break.
I want to add something really quick.
Go ahead. Well, hold on.
Go ahead.
Let's do that because we're coming back. All right, Aaron. Well, there's three things I think we need to address. Aaron, what you want to talk about, and then indulgences, and then the solas. All right, because I think if we're going to go here, let's go ahead and go here then. All right. So we'll do that when we come back. Thank you. It is still a very tricky real estate market out there, and it could see a huge change depending on this election. We could see interest rates go up. We could see them go way down. We could see them just stop trying to hold back this economy and just dump it all in Trump's lap. I mean, we still have to live, though. And there are times we still need to relocate. We need to find our first home. If you're a young couple like my oldest daughter, Anastasia, and her husband, Stephen, in these unprecedented times, make sure you've got an agent that you can trust to help you navigate all those possibilities I just mentioned, all right? And where would you find them? We made it as simple and easy for you as we can. We created a website called realestateagentsitrust.com. This is one of Glenn Beck's companies. If you're tuned into The Blaze, then obviously you know that you can trust old Glenn. And a lot of times the agents will recommend for you. And by the way, we have vetted them and verified their track records of success before we recommend them to you. And a lot of time these agents from all over the country are from right here in our audience at The Blaze. So you've got a value system in common with them as well. You want someone who knows the crazy market, the best practices, whether you need to get across town or across the country. They can help you get to across the finish line of the win that you're looking for at realestateagentsitrust.com. That's realestateagentsitrust.com. All right, since we broached the topic of the Reformation, we probably are not going to get to the rest of your feedback this month, so I'm going to save the ones we have, okay? And we'll come back in November to these exact questions. But this is one of the most pivotal moments in all of human history, regardless of which side you come down on it. When the History Channel did its most important people of the millennium in 1999, Johannes Gutenberg was third and Martin Luther was two. I don't remember who was number one, by the way. So this is a very important, pivotal moment. So there's three things I think we should address. I mentioned the 5 solas. We want to address that. Indulgences have to be addressed. Okay. When Todd says the Catholic Church was in need of some form of reform in this point in history, we have to address the indulgences thing. And then, Aaron, you had something you wanted to bring up as well.
Yeah, so it was just a minor comment. I was going to compliment you, but I get uncomfortable handing out compliments, and I know every dude feels uncomfortable taking compliments. So I'm going to
I hate them.
Reform this as an insult. What the hell is wrong with you? You did 20 minutes off the top of your head, spanning hundreds and hundreds of years of history of the church of this country. And if you're listening to this, you may not really recognize that because he's literally just sitting there talking into the camera. So you've got a problem, and what is wrong with you? So,
like my wife says, if she did not have my children, she'd swear I'm still a virgin. Indeed, yes.
So the other thing, Todd, just within Catholic teaching of their own history, there have been many schisms, correct? Some of them great, some of them not so great. Some of them large, some of them not so large.
Great as in scope.
Great as in scope. Thank you.
Yep. Sure.
Does Catholic historical teaching, what does it consider the Protestant Reformation? Is that a schism? Is that a great schism? Is it something completely different, categorically different? What is the teaching on that?
No, I think in the most immediate, loosest possible terms, it's referred to as the third great schism. There was the first one, which was the separation of the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, which formally happened in 1054, I think. But that pot had been brewing for a while.
The Avignon papacy.
That's number 2, and this would be the third one. Yes.
And then kind of to tee up this conversation, I can't remember, I don't want to set you up. I mean, from your point of view as a Catholic, some of the things when it comes to indulgences that the reformers were bringing up and had great concern about, do you see those as legit concerns on themselves, by themselves?
Oh yeah. It's funny. We had the professor who wrote in First Things. Well, First Things was founded by Father Richard John Newhouse,
former evangelical
Lutheran, if I'm not mistaken, became
Catholic priest.
Priest, but he was in Rome, there at the Vatican. And whoever he was with said, "What a beautiful building St. Peter's was." And already Catholic then, Father Richard John Newhouse turned to him and said, "Was it worth a Reformation?" Because that beautiful church was built with the money from the indulgences, the controversy.
Can we segue to that, Aaron? Did you have more you wanted to bring up?
That's all. Right.
So anytime there's a paradigm shift in a culture or on a global scale, you can almost always point to some form of populist moment that essentially crystallizes all of the angst and all of that zeitgeist and all of that energy into a galvanizing target, right? Think of the French Revolution. A lot of people don't know what a Bastille is, don't know what a reign of terror was, okay? They don't know that the French revolutionists then in the next 3 years imprisoned almost as many people as King Louis XVI did, okay? They don't know that. You know what they know? Let them eat cake. They know that, right? Why? That was the galvanizing populist moment, right? You may not necessarily, I don't know what came first, Lexington or Concord, okay? I don't know that it was several years between the Boston Tea Party and the start of the American Revolution, but that Boston Tea Party, I do know that had something to do with it, like that populist moment, right? All right, that exists, that exists in every paradigm shift on a community, cultural, global scale within human history. And Johann Tetzel is responsible for that. Like we have I don't have that coffee cup anymore, but the after Roe, we created that Ruth Bader Ginsburg coffee cup. couldn't have done it without her. If she would have resigned when her health got bad and let Obama appoint her, we would not have had the numbers to overturn Roe. Okay, but she stayed and hung on and died with Trump in office, so he got to replace her instead, right? Unwittingly, she's one of because she was a radical abortionist. Unwittingly, she's one of our biggest pro-life heroes. If Luther were here today and doing swag, all right, and if he were hosting a podcast, Luther'd have a coffee cup of Johann Tetzel and it would say, couldn't have done it without him, sitting right here on his desk, okay? So you have to understand the culture of this time. We're coming out of the Crusades. We're coming out of the plagues. And we're somewhere between feudalism, mercantilism, and we're like another century and a half away from Adam Smith's invisible hand and market economies and capitalism. So we're in this economic maelstrom where there's really just two classes, serfs and aristocracy. Unless you could be like what Luther's dad wanted him to be, which was a priest to join the priesthood for just like academic reasons because he wasn't good at manual labor and to get out of being a serf. All right, so there wasn't middle class hopes. There wasn't a German dream. There wasn't a French dream that I'm going to go on and own a home and have a job. None of this existed. There's not even in America yet. All right, and a lot of times you've got a lot of widows. A lot of single moms whose husbands died in the Crusades or in various wars or died of plagues, and I don't know their spirit. I couldn't get to a priest for last rites. I don't know if they're in hell or not. I don't know if they're in purgatory or not. All right. So at this point in time, the Catholic Church is undergoing a mass renovation of St. Peter's Basilica, and a guy named Johann Tetzel, who like Augustine or like Luther, is a German monk, and he starts touring the country to do a massive, like, complete just televangelist prosperity gospel level of hackery here. All right, no one would disagree with this, right? Everybody agrees this was a hatchet job.
Televangelist, that's a pretty good way to get people as close to it as possible.
I mean, he literally came up with a jingle, right? So you talked about Luther and the printing press created the first viral moment in world history. This is like the first like commercial jingle that's ever gone down in history. And it was, as soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. And he would just take this throughout the countryside. If you you would buy an indulgence with your donation. And that indulgence would be how the Pope would get your loved one's soul out of purgatory for you and into ecclesiastical bliss in heaven. Literally selling, for lack of a better description, literally selling salvation. That moment is occurring right as Luther is independently constructing this argument. But this was already turning populist appeal against the church. You're taking advantage of people. These people are poor. All right. They are, this is, Western civilization we're still coming out of the Crusades, the plagues. We're not having our best moment right now. And you're just taking advantage of all of these people. And without the printing press and without Johann Tetzel, chances are this thing never becomes as global as it ends up becoming. Fair?
Well, who's to say what happens 100 years later, but in that moment, because Aaron's right. This had been argued before, but that moment never becomes the moment. Maybe there's another moment 100 years later, but that moment doesn't become the moment without Johann Tetzel giving the Yari Curry or Wayne Gretzky from the wing feeding Mark Messier assist to Martin Luther. That gave him the galvanizing populist message that allowed him to politically claim the moral high ground in this debate. The Archduke Ferdinand moment, the spark.
Yes, that was it. So that's an important understanding of the Reformation to know that as well. Okay. And then the Reformers also realized that they had to have their own creeds, essentially, to compete with the catechism that existed for centuries within Christians via the Catholic Church. And so out of that came what became known as the 5 solas. Aaron, I can just imagine the amount of Protestants listening to this right now who don't know any of the stuff you and I are talking about.
Correct.
Which makes you wonder, then why are you even a Protestant? And they don't know. which is indicative of how terrible we've got the Catholic. Todd, pretend you're not sitting here for a second, Todd.
Yeah. When I bristle when he says the end of like the end of scholasticism, and then you bring that up.
Yes, he's correct. I don't agree with the context in which Todd is correct, but he is correct. Forget Todd, you're here for a minute. We have a Catholic that sits here with us that knows more about this than almost any of the Protestants in our audience.
He's the most Protestant Catholic I think I've ever met.
That just the state of the church, man. Whenever I start to think, are we being too hard on the church? I think of things like that, and then I'm like, no, not really, not at all. Okay.
Nothing new under the sun. The Protestant church is having a moment, just like it forgot its roots in some respects. It put things on cruise control. The exact same demon is being dealt with now amongst Protestantism corporately.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
Because what's the consistent factor here? Human nature. Yeah. All right. But out of this came the five solas, which just means not only but alone. Okay, and alone, that's a key thing. Okay, because they're not claiming there's no other authorities or no other wisdoms or no other ethics, but that alone something must ultimately be the final authority, not the only authority. Right? Like for example, the Bible talks about God has a divine council. Right, so that divine council must have some authority, right? Okay, but we're not claiming it has the ultimate authority, right? The ultimate authority is God. Okay, and so that's what sola means as opposed to solo. All right, and so those five things were sola Christos, meaning the only atonement for human sin that satisfies the wrath of God is the atoning work of Jesus Christ at the cross. Catholics, 100%, we agree on that, right?
Well, a lot. There's details within and interpretations, but a lot closer than where we're going to go.
By the way, Protestants are going to have details too. Does faith precede regeneration? Does regeneration precede faith?
Once we get deeper, we'd have nuances.
But the general of that, there's going to be nuances of disagreement within Protestant thought about that.
Yes.
But yes, okay. So there's nowhere else to go to satisfy the wrath of God. No sacrifice you can make, no other God you could come to, or anything you could do, and that work was done for you, and you cannot earn it. Okay, sola fide, which is that we are justified by faith alone. Okay, that's a major disagreement. We spent how many weeks going back and forth on that here in the Roman study. So that comes out of the Reformation. Sola gratias, which is that we are saved by grace. We cannot earn our salvation. Okay. Now, you guys would say you're right. You cannot earn the initial act of your salvation. You must then act to maintain it, right? That's the argument we've been having. Okay. We also agree that you cannot commit an act that ultimately causes your salvation to occur. That is an act of grace that God made occur via his son at the cross. Okay.
Catholics made Pelagius a heretic because they agree with that.
Correct. So, yeah. And we agree, and thank you for that. Yes. And then sola Dei Gloria, that the purpose of human life ultimately in all things is to glorify God. Right? So our marriages should ultimately be to glorify God. We should work ultimately to glorify God. That's where the idea of a Protestant work ethic came from. Okay. We do arts to glorify God. We raise our children with the intent of the nurture and admonition of the Lord to glorify God, that ultimately the main point of human life is to glorify God. And then the one that is the biggest, if sola fide is not the biggest debate, this one is. Sola scriptura. That scripture alone is the final authority on that which binds the conscience of the believer and ecclesiastical matters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That ultimately something must rule, and that scripture alone rules. Not the only authority, but it is the final one. And this is why you've heard us say in the past that ultimately the debates between Catholics and Protestants manifest theologically, but the reality is they are a baseline ecclesiastical debate. All right. Does the church have the authority to say, just as an example, does the church have the authority to say that Mary was born or that Mary lived a life without sin? Or does the scripture say, or do we say, since the scripture does not clearly itemize that, we're not teaching that? Okay. That's just one example, but there's many. Okay. But that's where ultimately do we get our theology from? Where do we get our hermeneutic from? So Todd, I know we're almost out of time, in like 30 seconds. Explain how you guys, from your perspective, how you treat the scriptures as authoritative in the Catholic Church.
Well, tradition and the magisterium, we disagree.
Define that really quick. What is that?
Well, tradition is...
No, we talked about tradition, the magisterium, I'm sorry.
Oh, the teaching authority of the current leadership at any given time of the Catholic Church,
Okay.
the bishops, etc. But we think that Scripture alone doesn't make sense because Scripture says... It's self-refuting. Scripture actually says there's something outside of Scripture alone, and the authority of the apostles that the Protestants say they're getting back to, their oral teaching and tradition far preceded, and many of them didn't write at all, far preceded the formulation of what we now know as the Bible. That is the very short version of it.
And that's 500 years of persecutions, deaths, revolutions, reformations, denominational foundings. And we just scratched the surface. Romans 8:28.